The following video interview is part of the USMC VTA History Project. We are in Washington, D.C. at the reunion of VTA. The date is October 30th, 2015. I've got two gentlemen who have a history and experiences in ONTOS, a very limited knowledge of ONTOS and its operation in the various, and particularly in Vietnam, because it was such a unique vehicle.
Okay, my name is Richard Walters. I was a private PFC, Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps, and I started out as a driver in the ONTOS, and unfortunately they pulled them back after 6-7 months, and I never became an OC. But as it turns out, with the internet, sometime around 2000, we started having our own reunion, the ONTOS people, and we actually found a few ONTOS and we started restoring them. So at some point, I always wanted to be a mechanic. I was a driver. I've become more of a mechanic, and I'm very familiar with the vehicle. And somewhere also along the line, I became a semi-historian, so I know a few facts about the ONTOS.
Okay, and when were you in Vietnam?
I got in the tail end of '68.
Okay.
What was very interesting about that is there's a whole crush sometime around December 67, January 68, where 20, 30 people came over to the one division, 1st Marine Division, 1st ATs or 1st Anti-Tank Battalion, and they were there just in time for Way City. So their rotation was almost up, say in January or February of '69. I got over there in December of '68. So they actually trained me. The rotation worked out really well for me, because some people never graduated from loader. They stayed there because they just couldn't move up. So my first day, they grabbed me off the plane. I really wasn't an ONTOS crewman. I was trained as a rockets person, 0351 or recoilless rifle. But they grabbed me. The MOS is a couple digits away, 0351 for the infantry weapons platoon, 0353 for the ONTOS crewman MOS. And they put me in the driver's seat. So I had never seen one before, but I guess 3rd platoon was a combat platoon. It was always out in the field. So somehow they grabbed me. They thought I had my wits about me, and ended up, that's where my career started, sometime in '68 as a driver. And as it turned out, the rotations would have had, say, 20, 30 people leaving in January or February, but 3rd platoon, who saw a lot of action, almost everybody extended. So what happened was they trained me from, they had just returned to Da Nang from northern tactics, fighting the NVA up in Phu Bai and Quang Tri, where they were for most of '68. And they're a very, very good influence. Matter of fact, the one ONTOS that I was on was A35. It was called The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. But I considered George Spaulding on A34. We worked together in teams. It was a light section, a great OC, the best I ever saw. And he had a great influence on me. If I didn't listen to some of the things he said, I probably would have never gone to college, and I probably wouldn't have been, I think I was a very serious person when I got out. I wouldn't have been a serious person. I'd been an electrician or something. As it turns out, I went to college for 5 years, University of Arizona, the VA paid for it, became a CPA, and I consider a lot of the training I learned, both combat and I guess life quality from first ATs.
Wow, that's great. And your partner in crime is?
I'm Roger Luli. I went to Quantico, OCS, went to Camp Delmar near Pendleton for tank school, so I was trained as a tank officer. When I arrived in Vietnam, there were no tank officer openings for me, so at the time it was Lieutenant Colonel Jinx McCain was the battalion commander, and he called me in and said, you know, I promise you that we'll eventually get you a platoon, so I'm going to send you to ATs. So that's how I wound up with the ATs.
1st Marine Division or 3rd Marine?
Third.
Okay.
First duty assignment was on Con Tien.
Oh gosh.
That was a terrible place, and after about 50 days there, the battalion commander came and said, how long have you and your ONTOS crew been here? And I told him about 50 days, and he said, you need to go somewhere else. So they sent us to Yalin, which was another bad place, so it wasn't really an R&R. But the The ONTOS in those places was mostly defensive positions. We would guard perimeter. At night, we only had 4 vehicles per platoon rather than the 5 that were required, so I'm assuming attrition before I got there.
Right.
We lost some. In November of '67, they said bring all the ONTOS back. So we loaded them on a naval vessel. It wasn't an LST, but it was a step down, and we took them out the Quaviet River, back in the Perfume River, offloaded them in Hue, and took them down to a fire base, and we got them ready to be farmed out. They're picking out the best ones to take and keep with the 3rd Tank Battalion, and the rest I'm sure you can tell us where they were
Yeah,
shipped
they were
and where they
probably-
wound up.
Yeah. Wow.
But that was my experience with ATs.
And you were
mostly.
in Vietnam 67, 68?
I got there in August of '67 and left September '68.
Okay, okay, wow. Were you disappointed in that you got ONTOS versus tanks?
I really, I've just been training. It took 3 months of training in
Yeah.
California with the tank, and I wanted that. But I met Colonel McCain at the basic school, and he's the one that taught me the tanks at the time. So I knew him, and he
Yeah.
knew me, and his word was good. He got me back to tanks.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, we'll turn it back to the historian now.
Okay, look at those glasses.
How in the world did the ONTOS ever become, first of all, a vehicle that anybody wanted, but more importantly, that the Marine Corps wanted?
That's exactly right. The starting point. One of the things you want to start out with is the name. They call it ONTOS. Nobody, it seems like, speaks many foreign languages in the Marine Corps, and ONTOS means the thing in Greek. So what it was this is back in the 50s. You had a chassis with 2 tracks on it. It would look almost like a snowcat or something if they didn't have any weapons. And then all of a sudden they threw 6 106s on it. What's a 106? 106 is probably an 11-foot long cannon, 106 millimeters in diameter. And to confuse it a little bit more, they put some spotting rifles on it. What's a spotting rifle? It shoots a 50 caliber bullet, uses a nice red tracer so you can follow where it's going. It actually has a special 50 caliber, so many grains, and I guess so many grains for the projectile. So it has the same trajectory as a 106 round. So wherever the 106 round is going, if they're bore sighted, both are on the same, plane, wherever the spotter round hits, then the big one's going to hit. And at the same time, that little spotter round, you could probably break it off if you wanted to. It has white phosphorus in it. As soon as that white phosphorus is exposed to air, it starts burning and gives you, and it's only a small amount, gives you a nice white puff of smoke. And you have a 10-power scope on the ONTOS, same as an M48.
Okay.
And what you have to do is you have to look for that spot of smoke. It's not going to stay there forever. So once it hits, you got to be concentrating. You can't say, I'll come back a minute later and look for it. So you got a little bit of time, say a few seconds. Wherever that hits, then you got the major go. And in a combat situation, you won't do that. Say you're getting ambushed. One vehicle turn that way, one turn that way, and you start firing. But many times you're not in a combat situation. You do an H&I firing, or it's a long-range shot. So instead of wasting a $50 round, you'll waste a 50-cent. So now you have 6 106s, you have 4 spotter rifles, and you're going to throw a 30 caliber in the mix. All on top of the small platform. And remember, the cannon's 11 feet long. The vehicle might be 12 feet long, because the cannon goes from like the front fender just about to the back fender. So you can add a couple of feet in the back, maybe 6 inches in the front. So now that if the cannon's 11, you have a vehicle that's 13. Most cars we make are like 16 feet long, even today. So here you have this vehicle, with all this firepower on it, short, but it's also pretty stubby. I mean, it's not going to compare to an M48. It's not going to be 12 feet across, but it's probably a good 8 feet, I don't know, 4 inches, say it's 100 inches. But if you go to put it on a trailer, say it was a tractor trailer or something, you're over the sides. So you got a real wide vehicle, but you also got a very short vehicle. And then, excuse my expression, you're putting like 10 pounds of shit in a 1 pound can. So at any rate, remember, this is back in the 50s.
Right.
So, the 50s, pretty mild-mannered, I guess, in a way. Well, matter of fact, I don't know if they have too many wild weapons like this now. But this came along, everybody's looking at it, and, it was, most people be awestruck by it.
Mhm.
And that's where I think the name The Thing came out.
Okay.
So-
Volkswagen jumped right all over that name, The Thing, and with their own vehicle. And it looked a little like an ONTOS. It was really, almost looked like a bad Jeep.
Yeah.
But it was called The Thing because everybody looked at it. Nobody didn't look at it twice.
Yeah, the Marine Corps could have made a lot of money off of that one.
Yeah, they could have.
They infringed on their copyright.
Yeah.
So what happened was, let me take a quick look at my notes here. This vehicle came out in theory around, I guess, right around the Korean War. And this era is called the Cold War. And basically, what's the Cold War? I think it was a political situation more than anything else where capitalism was, or the United States with capitalism was worried about communism with Russia. And at the same time, Russia had some capabilities.
Mhm.
But the thing was, people were taking it serious, and definitely in the 50s. And in the 60s, when we were most of us in Vietnam, we still feared Russia, and we still feared China.
Yeah.
Communism was a serious thought. You get into the 80s, 90s, what's communism today? It's a failed economic system. But at any rate, they were worried about the Cold War. And I think one of the things they realized with Russia is maybe not as capable as the Germans or the Third Reich or the Wehrmacht or whatever they call them, but they had pretty good tanks, and they had pretty good artillery, and eventually, they beat the Germans.
Mhm.
So they were afraid that all of a sudden 50,000 tanks are going to come from East Germany into Europe, and they said they want to get an anti-tank weapon, something would knock them out. And I think they actually saw some small tanks or fast tanks during World War II that were better than the Patton tank. They were quick, they were maneuverable, and could knock out, or try to knock out Panzer tanks.
Right.
So at any rate, I think somebody says, we need a lightweight tank, a high firepower. So here was the thought, and this is in '53, and the Army was the one. I guess most of the things are from the Army, but the Army was, I guess, going to be the benefactor, who's going to underwrite this whole project. And they were talking to Allison Chalmers. So they did some prototypes. They did 4-man, 6-man, different versions. I think they even had a revolver on the top, like a 106 that was like a 6-shooter. The rounds would spin.
Oh, geez.
So they had a few different prototypes, right? And that 6-shooter version would have meant the loaders don't have to get out and load. But that's another fallacy I'll talk about later. But at any rate, they went into production in '55, and they wouldn't have gone into production because the Army canceled the contract. It wasn't really a big contract, not in today's terms. It was 299 vehicles, and I think it was approximately $15 million. I think these vehicles cost around $50,000 to make, which is cheap. If you went to make an M48 in the same era, it was probably $250,000. If you
Yeah.
want to make an M1A1 today, it's probably $1 million.
Did you have to sign for your ONTOS?
No.
Really?
No, I didn't.
Because you talk about that value.
Yeah.
I had to sign for my 5 tanks, and I'm
Yeah.
looking at about $3 million thing here. If I screw
Yeah.
these up,
Yeah.
I'm on the line for it. Whoa.
Yeah, I used to tell Army people that when I was in ONTOS, that if we blew our tank ONTOS up or got blown up, we weren't necessarily going to get another one. And the Army
Yeah.
people said to me, you're crazy, that can't happen, it would never happen. I said, no, the Marine
No,
Corps just don't
that's
have another
right.
vehicle.
No,
for it."
yeah. You don't have a parking lot.
No.
for it.
So at any rate, what happened was the Army didn't take the contract, and the Marines said, hey, almost like the flame tank, that was going to be unique to the Army, the Marines. They decided they were going to pick up the contract. So they made 299 of these, and they started production in '55, and by 1957 they had them into the Marine Corps inventory. And let me see what else is in that. And then, yeah, they got them in there in 1957. The next part I was going to talk about is how they worked this with the Marine Corps, which I'm not really an authority on, but I think I got a little bit of a grasp on it. They were giving 45 to a battalion, and there might have been 1 or 2 extra for like an XO or a CO. They were trying to model it after the tank battalions.
Yeah.
So I guess that would have been 47 vehicles. And at the same time, they were trying to outfit all the battalions, or all the divisions. So you'd have 45 per battalion, or battalion, and then I'd just take it to like 2nd Division down in Camp Lejeune. They would get 45. Then you had 1st Marine Division, which was Camp Pendleton. They would get 45. Then I think we were maintaining 3rd Marine Division in Okinawa. They would get 45. Then you had something called the Schools Battalion, which was in Del Mar. Not initially. I think they didn't set that up to almost the mid-60s. But at any rate, they had to get a whole bunch. Then there was a reserve division. I don't know how big the reserves are in the Marines anymore, but I guess they're still there. They got a bunch of ONTOS. And then when Vietnam heated up, I think the 5th Marine Division was initiated, where part of it went to Vietnam and part of it stayed in California at Camp Pendleton because 1st Marine Division was fully deployed. So all of a sudden you got 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, which is a reserve, and 5th Marine Division, and school battalions. And then, ironically enough, not too far away, Quantico got some. And Quantico was also some sort of road course or proving grounds. They would test vehicles. I mean, even though Aberdeen is probably the Army's one, the Marines had like a junior Aberdeen here. But they also took this vehicle kind of seriously. They would show some of its firepower capabilities, and I have some pictures of it. That they'd have it out on a Friday night. People come out that were on the base and watch this thing perform. I think it was mostly the officers, but I think the enlisted were invited too. But
Like entertainment on a Friday night.
yeah,
Let's go watch the ONTOS fire.
instead
Pop
of
some
going,
caps.
instead of going to the movies that Friday night. So I'm not sure if the enlisted men would have given it up, but their Friday night. But at any rate, I've got some pictures. They showing the tracer going out and got it in still motion, and it says there was they're test firing. So Quantico actually had a few, and I've sort of backed into that too. We had a Marine Corps major named Fred Romke, passed away recently. He was in the Marine Corps tanks, and he got 2 of the prototypes, or 2 ONTOS from the Marine Corps. But the day before he got them, they took a torch and cut the 106s, and I guess they cut part of the turret. So he brought 2 back up to Indianapolis, where he lived, and he put them on. And he put them in a parade, without the turret, but with a .50 caliber on there. But it ran, and somehow he was able to, had the connections to the Marine Corps to get a military vehicle like that. So Quantico actually had a few. So before you know it, I was taking 45 times 5, and then what it was is just when you think you know everything about the Marine Corps, all bets are off. There's probably something called a depot system, like Barstow or Albany, that's almost like a warehouse. And they have their supplies or trucks there that if they need some, they pull them from there. So I would normally think there was some there. And I actually saw the number of his in Vietnam. It was 226941. We tracked these with an Excel sheet off of photos. And that's almost the end of the production run. The production run ended.
So you got the newest.
The last one.
The last one.
Yeah, one of the last ones.
The newest and the last.
Yeah.
So, and I actually, on my Excel sheet with that number, I have some of the history on that. I had it on Excel, and it says we've spotted it such and such in Vietnam. We've seen it with such and such company. So we have a little history on the 226941. The first 3 digits, 226, are the same for all of them. So that's a little about the history where the ONTOS came in as a Cold War threat. And no, I left the best part out. The whole theory here was they were practicing Reagan economics about 30 or 40 years too early. Their idea was that if they sent 50,000 tanks at us, well, we're going to have 50,000 ONTOS. So what if we lose 10,000 ONTOS? We got plenty, and then we're going to actually outproduce them, and we're going to make them cheap, and we're going to outgun them. He says maybe they might have a better tank, maybe it might be like a Panzer, but we're going to actually outspend and outnumber them. So their idea was Reaganomics at the best. We got a bigger budget than them. They're never going to beat us. So this is all part of that Cold War, and it's pretty important because it's a different era. Unless you were there, it's hard to explain to somebody today. You were worried about a communist coming over here, and then they bring up the Cuban Missile Crisis, where JFK was playing footsies with them, and we didn't want the missiles 90 miles away, but it was just. It was something.
We had bomb shelters.
Fall
Exactly.
under your desk at school.
Desk fire drill or whatever.
And the
area drills or whatever
the
they
other thing
were.
too is I'd actually bring it up in college, like 20 years later, whatever it was, went to school in 1970. And I'd say to some of the professors there, we got Nike bases over here. Oh, they're obsolete. But they actually built a lot of those Nike bases,
Yeah.
thinking that if something came over, we'll shoot them.
Yeah.
Whatever a Nike rocket would do. So, deployment. Okay, and, yes, they came into, let me explain a little more there. In 1957, they got into the inventory. Then they went to all the various different divisions. It was modeled after, it appears to be modeled after a tank battalion. And the next thing here. Yeah, the first deployment, not that this is any, real combat, but they were definitely there. They actually hit a World War II mine. They got deployed on these med cruises. So they go to Crete, they go to Spain, they go to different, like, I think, friendly countries that were in Europe there. And one of them actually hit a World War II mine and got blown up. I would have never believed it, but they showed me a picture of it. And it blew the whole side of the track off. I think it was on Crete or one of these different islands. And then in the 60s, they had their full-fledged tank battalion, they had their full-fledged anti-tank battalion. There was a picture down in Lejeune with JFK inspecting the ONTOS. We also called them pigs, so JFK was inspecting the pigs. And tanks were called tigers. By the way.
Right.
And that was 1960. And this era also was with these anti-tank weapons. The next best weapon would have been a 3.5 rocket. There was no laws at this point. So you had this big, like, bazooka, probably straight out of World War II, except what they did in the 50s and 60s, they put like a Cadillac engine in things. So here you had, instead of like a 2.5 rocket, now you had a 3.5. It was a big rocket. Then at the same time, they came along with that one weapon. That was a pretty good weapon. Originally it was 105, and it was confusing everybody. So they changed it to 106 millimeter recoilless rifle. And I think the name on that is numbers M40 or M40A1. But pretty good weapon, and I'll speak about that a little bit later. And then they also had another one. They had something called a BAT. It was a Jeep, and they threw a 106 in the back seat. Meanwhile, the Marines were going with a Mighty Mite, sort of an aluminum Jeep, air transportable, but they still had a lot of Willys Jeeps around. I think they're M38s, A1s. They had something where they could knock out the back seats, put a tripod in, and and split the windshield, a special windshield, and they'd have a 106 in it. So these are all some of their anti-tank weapons. I mean, where I got a lot of this information from, and I've seen pictures, is from the Marines that were there in 58, 60s, prior to Vietnam.
Right.
So they used to call that Jeep the BAT, or a BAT.
Okay.
But, this is part of that Cold War that, was almost straight out of that TV show Combat, or Rat Patrol.
Yeah.
Well, if we ever see a Russian tank here, we'll use the Jeep on it.
Yeah.
So it was something where your anti-tank weapons was the bazooka, similar to World War II, a Jeep with a big 106 on it,
Yeah.
and then the anti-tank. There was no tows, there was no sophisticated ones. And then I guess, of course, this was geared for anti-tanks, or to stop a tank. I'm sure you had your M48s or whatever patent tanks were available back then that had an anti-tank round as well.
Right.
But this was geared up that if they're coming from the Army originally, if they were coming over the Berlin Wall or something, we're ready for them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they never got their 50,000. They got 299, but the Marine Corps took it.
And we got it, and the Marines got them all.
Sort of like our beer ration.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, the next thing I said, that's a little bit the history, and that's boring, but I figured I'd put that first because everybody will say, okay, what's interesting? What's interesting is going to be, what is a thing? What is a thing? It's an 18 to 19,000 pounds loaded. What this means in plain English is it's a pretty lightweight vehicle. If you went to an M48, the turret might weigh 10 tons. Well, this is less. It's probably like 9 tons. And then if you strip this out and left half the things out, this thing might be down to 16,000 pounds. Well, what are you going to strip out? Well, I don't know how much, maybe the ammo, but What it had was it had 6 106s. It was pretty awesome looking. Then it had the 4 spotters. Then you had the Browning machine gun. Then for the crews, you had 80. Oh, that's it. You had 10,000 rounds of 30 caliber ammunition, easy, and you probably had more. You just loaded it up, and actually you can be using that a lot. So it was actually a wise idea. You only had 18 rounds of 106s rounds in there. You had supposed to be 6 in the tubes, and then you had 8 in an ammo well, and then you had 4 sitting behind the driver. So it wasn't an awful lot. As it turns out, when they did put it in a combat situation, we got rid of the loader. The driver became the loader. The OC or tank commander would actually help, like, open the breeches a little. The driver would hop out, which was me, and we carried 42 rounds. So
You gave up one guy and got
yeah.
20 more rounds or whatever.
Exactly. And
Wow.
then you normally say, I don't know if I believe it. Well, I got pictures of it. And where this happened was Way City.
Oh.
And they actually fired an awful lot of rounds. The next thing is they have probably 80 rounds of 50 caliber spotter. They probably have 4 magazines with 20 in them. And then they have their 45s. What happens, the loader rated a 45 sidearm, and the TC or OC rated a 45 sidearm. Then the driver, he'd be, and they probably had like 7 or 8 clips with 7 rounds each. And then the driver, he had a grease gun, and he probably had, 7, 8 magazines also. Unfortunately, some people were smart, and they put like 28 in there. Other people put 30, and supposedly that was not a good idea because the spring was weak.
Yeah, that's right.
So he had the grease gun. Now, either one of these weapons, unless you were shaking hands with the person, 100 feet away, a 45 round really drops.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the grease gun. That if you were pointing it toward the sky, it might hit something like 300 meters away. So that was part of the weight in there. Then, of course, we had to carry grenades. So the grenades, of course, you probably always had a thermite in case the vehicle was going to get captured. You were going to melt something. I'm not sure what you're going to melt there because half of it was a weapon system.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe you'd put it on the turret. They wouldn't be able to turn it. And then you had smoke grenades. And then, of course, we carried a lot of fragmentation grenades. And that's all part of this weight coming in at 19,000 pounds and being stripped out. Then we always had it was lightweight track. If you had Arnold Schwarzenegger or a Hulk Hogan, he could just pick up one section of track and carry it like a lunchbox.
Was it rubberized?
It was rubberized. It was a weird looking track. You had track bars on it with 5/16 bolts, which are pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
But they took 2 strips of rubber, as if they're making radial tires today.
Right.
It was rubber, but with steel cords and with nylon in there. So they had 2 rubber belts with a track bar on the top, another reciprocal bar so your drive sprockets would catch it, and 2 pieces of rubber. And you'd always say to yourself, how does this possibly work? Well, it worked real well. I mean, what happened was, I think people had driven some of the track for like 10 years, and the supply system never kept up. And, in '67, they were complaining, gee, we got broken track. They fought a major battle, and all of a sudden they got 10,000 pieces of track, and they threw on like 800 in one day. But the track was pretty durable. It got like 10 years.
Yeah.
And then, all of a sudden you got resupplied with more than you could ever use. So you had this lightweight track, which is very unique. If you went to a tank, there's nobody picking up a section of track and
Oh,
carrying
gosh.
that.
Jeez.
And then again, if you wanted to change it, it would have been nice if somebody ever heard of like 6-sided sockets, because these things get stripped occasionally,
Right.
or air tools. But they became very, very good at changing track on it. So what's the next thing here? So they had the 6 106s, 4 spotters. The other thing too is the 106s need a little explanation. It's a recoilless rifle. It's completely opposite of probably a 105 howitzer or a 90 millimeter cannon on a tank. When those things fire, the whole vehicle jumps back, or there's a recoiling action or something, but you don't want to be near whatever the recoiling mechanism is, because it'll hurt you.
Yeah.
On the 106, you don't want to be behind it either. But you could take a bottle of water, a glass of milk, put it on the 106 tube, fire it, and that would still be there. You wouldn't spill it. The 106 had basically no recoil to it. there was equal energy going out the front of the tube and out the back.
How far back did you have to be safe?
Well, that was a good question, because a lot of times we fired and somebody was like 100 feet back, it would blow them back another 50 feet, and they got like a sunburn. You know, most of the time that was one of our big problems, that we would have to look to make sure if somebody was behind, the TC or OC would have to look to make sure nobody was behind them.
Not only blast, the heat, but also some of the pellets
Pellets
that
would go
didn't
back.
go off, they would
Right.
go back too.
Oh.
Yeah.
And they always gave you a demonstration of that with a ground mount, not necessarily an ONTOS. In Camp Lejeune, an
Right.
infantry training regiment, they'd take an ammo crate and they'd put it like 2 feet behind. Well, an ammo crate was pine,
Yeah.
so you could have
Toothpicks.
yeah, you could have probably done that with a smoke
You
grenade.
got the message when you
Yeah,
saw the
so-
toothpicks come shot firing.
Yeah, so and then the other message they would do is that, look what that did with the 106. They would take like a 5-gallon can, a jerry can or something, and they'd put a blasting cap in it. So a little blasting cap with it, and all of a sudden the jerry can was shredded. They say, be careful of the blasting caps, be careful of this.
Yeah.
So the 106, though, was a very unique weapon. If you pushed on it when you had it in a tripod ground mount, that fired the major. If you pulled on it, it fired the spotter. But it was originally, you know, if you wanted to use a phrase, I know it's overused, it was actually a point-and-shoot weapon.
Mhm.
Wherever you pointed it, it was going to shoot. It was no calculations, and actually it's a great weapon for the military, because, you know, a lot of your snuffies, you don't want to do a lot of thinking.
Yeah.
You just want something nice and
Point and
easy
shoot.
that works. So in other words, it's going to be pretty hard to screw it up.
Now, do you have various rounds like HE and
Yep.
Flechette? And
Oh yeah,
Okay,
we're gonna get to that one there, but this commonality, why I wanted to spend a little time on it was, the Marine Corps is a big place sometimes, and one of the big places are rifle companies. So they were using these 106s now, and say the 1st Marine Division, 1st Marine Regiment, the 5th Marine Regiment, the 7th Marine Regiment, in a weapons platoon. So now if you needed parts, or if you needed rounds, you know, you're using this exactly the same. The tankers really didn't have that ability with the 90 millimeter. It was focused straight for them.
Right.
But at the same time, if the Marines had it, there was a good chance the Army had it. So if the Marines had, I don't know, say 1,000 106s in their division, the Army probably had 10,000.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you had a large production run of 106s, so you could draw on them, but you also had a lot of ammunition.
Right.
So you were using it all over the place, and that commonality is pretty important sometimes when you need spare parts or you need crates of ammunition. You know, it wasn't just like a one-off, like say, gee, you know, I need something for my flamethrower. You know, they were using it there. So, oh, and the other part they were using it also was the infantry and the Army. They had it on another vehicle besides the ground mount, a mule.
Mhm.
So they put, what is a mule? And here we go, another new vehicle for you. It's like a sheet of plywood, almost like this table, with 4 wheels on it. Suspension doesn't give. They just 10 pounds of pressure in the air. With an aircraft engine of all things, a Hercules engine, like 30 horsepower, 3 or 4 speed transmission. And the Marines loved it for hauling gear, but they could put a 106 on it now, and they'd have a platform to fire a 106. They could move it around a little. And they did use that a lot in way, and they used it all over. The infantry would use anything you gave them.
Mhm.
And if it ran with wheels, you know that there was going to get a lot of usage out of
Yeah.
it, because it's better than walking. So that was another area that the 106 was in. The Army, the infantry regiments or companies, battalions, on ground mounts, and on the mule. And also in the Army, they had a new Jeep back in the 60s called the M151. It was a Ford Jeep. It was actually a very, very good Jeep. It was in the inventory all the way up to the Humvee, and the Army actually had 106s in the back seat. The Marines, I don't think, had too many, but there's a lot of pictures of them in the Army that they would just drive around in villages and hang out or something. They had a 106 there.
Yeah.
But the thing was is that the major point here is the 106, you know, it definitely had some large production numbers, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So, and then, let me get over to the next page here. Page 4. Oh yeah, I'll just jump into it now. I think I had that in page 5. I don't know what I can do with it. Page 4, what is it now? 18,000. Yeah, okay, now it leads right into it. What it can do is going into that area. Well, one of the things it can do is it'll stop a frontal assault. If you had an ONTOS in front of you, but so an M48, there's a lot of energy coming out of the tube. It doesn't matter what round you have. Nobody's really going to charge into an ONTOS like within 50 feet. All you have to do is just fire it. And occasionally, when a base was getting overrun, they had people climb on top of the vehicles. They would actually just say fire, and the TC or OC would say, well, what do you want me to shoot? Doesn't matter. You got somebody climbing on the back of the vehicle. So they'd fire.
Oh, yeah.
So there was so much, energy coming out of either the front of the tube on a cannon, 90 millimeter cannon, or a 106. It would stop frontal assaults. The other thing was the concussion is tough, but it had a deafening noise. All these cannons are just very, very loud. So if you happen to be in front of it, it's the wrong place to be. You're going to need some hearing aids eventually, or something. It's just going to. If the concussion doesn't get you, the noise definitely does another effect on it. Now the rounds. Yeah, exactly. Here I am. They started out with two basic rounds. They called it a HEP-T, which is high explosive plastic tracer. Pretty advanced round because these are from the 50s. They use something called composition B in it, which is almost, I think, like a plastic explosive. It's a lot of bang for the buck. So the thing is that when it would hit something in a fraction of a second, it didn't detonate. It would just like splatter, and it'd actually, blow a bigger hole in whatever it was hitting or have more impact. But they also had, they called the T in here. So it's high explosive plastic tracer. And what it was, when you fired the high explosive round, unlike a tank, well, maybe, I don't know if they had it, but definitely on the 106, you would see this red glow. So if you ever see footage of Way City, you were seeing an awful lot of red glows going across the river.
Yeah.
The next one was typical round. It was a good round. These are all 106 diameter, all 19-pound projectiles. The round's around 39 pounds, and we throw them around like nothing. And next one, which would actually put a hole in a tank, was called a heat round, high explosive anti-tank. And it was a conical round or a shaped charge. And I think it was rated for like 16 inches of steel and 4 feet of concrete. Some of those might be a little optimistic, but there was not any tank that could stand up to 106. If you're looking at all the different recoilless rifles, like 75 millimeter, 57, all the predecessors, the 106 was the Cadillac of them. It's just like I said, it's like putting a big engine into a small car. This was definitely overbuilt. It was the mentality they seemed to have like in the 50s and 60s. We'll just make it bigger and better. Yeah. So the 106 anti-tank round was definitely a good round. Now the third round didn't come out to, I think, 1967. It was called the flechette round or beehive round. And one of the phrases they use, because the ONTOS really has caught on the internet, is the world's largest shotgun. And they're probably not wrong, because it's 106 millimeter. The tanks have 90 millimeters, so technically it's a few millimeters bigger. Yeah. But the thing was that on the 106, it had 6,600 darts. Now, if you say a dart, you think you're throwing it to the board. And it's pretty close. It's got the tail fins on it, but I think it also has a little bit of barbs in the front. So when these things started flying, they didn't drop or this, they just kept going, and it's supposed to be like an arrow. The other thing too is there's something with physics here. Most Marines don't understand that at all. But it was leaving the gun at, 600 miles an hour, say, right? Then all of a sudden you fuse it, say 100 meters downrange or 1,000 millimeters downrange or meters downrange, and you get more kinetic energy. Most Marines would call that a double bang. So at any rate, now it was flying at 600. When it explodes, especially if you get it to hit something within 50, 100 feet, you had even more energy. So you had a very, very good round here. What's important now is you've sort of transformed this anti-tank weapon from stopping the Russians in the Berlin Wall to an anti-personnel round, anti-personnel vehicle or anti-personnel round, which was great. And to give you an example of that, they probably had 15 different bridges going up around Way City and that Fubai area. Well, I think we only had 5, maybe 8 ONTOS available. Part of my platoon, all of my platoon, 3rd platoon, and part of 2nd platoon to go on a bridge, and they couldn't work in pairs. So you had 1 ONTOS per bridge. Any ONTOS that was on a steel bridge, these are steel bridges, remained standing. So what happened was they did get hit. The 1 ONTOS would turn them back, You couldn't get any infantry support because you're on a narrow bridge. They can't be behind you. They can't be in front of you. I don't know if you really want them alongside of you, but if they don't, I don't think they want to be there.
Yeah.
So any ONTOS that was on those 8 bridges during Tet of '68 remained standing. They didn't get blown up. So what was happening was they would throw human wave attacks at it. They would mortar it. They would try to use satchel charges. They would use B-40s, RPGs. Some of the ONTOS took some hits. They'd lose like 1 bank of guns, but they kept firing. And this anti-personnel round, they probably fired a few of them. I'm sure they shot more Hep T than anything else. But the situation was that if you had a human wave charge, you would set your 106 round for MA, or muzzle action. And even if you had it on a bunker, perimeter duty, you'd set it there, that if you had somebody in a wire, you weren't trying to aim down range. You wanted to stop them now.
Right.
So you had an anti-personnel weapon. And the round was, strangely enough, made in Indiana, of all places, by Whirlpool.
Really?
So the thing here is, yeah, I guess it was a good contract. But, but it was just something that, taking, it's almost like taking an M48 tank and saying, you're going to walk on water now.
Yeah.
1 minute it's the biggest boy in the block, or baddest boy in the block. The next minute, we're going to be like an Amtrak. But transforming an anti-tank weapon to an anti-personnel, was, and you know what? I don't think anybody thought about it. I think they just developed it for the 106, and it was that commonality again. So that was some of the rounds there. Now, talking about what it can do. What it could do is it had 6 shots. And how important is that? It's real important, because you have like 1/2-inch steel on the ONTOS. You do not want to tank a tank round. You do not want an M48 firing or a T55 firing back at you or hitting you first, because you just won't survive.
Right.
So you had 6 shots. The other thing was a small target, and probably develop, tactics and procedures for taking on tanks, but we really didn't have that. But 6 shots before you have to reload, and you could fire them. Everybody's always talking about arming it so you could fire 6 at one time. I'm sure they did that at Pendleton. I'm sure they did it at one of the bases once, just to create a lot of noise. But you'd never do that in a million years, because tactically you just shot all your ammunition.
Yeah.
So you could fire 6 shots. If you're in a combat situation, as the lieutenant said here, you wouldn't waste any time on a 50 caliber spotter.
Yeah.
But the 50 caliber spotter wasn't a bad weapon to have, because if you're taking a long distance shot, you'd say, I got some time here, we're on the perimeter, let me just zero this in where I want it to go. So you had the 4 50 caliber spotters. Some Marines are pretty inventive. They would actually try to use it as a sniper tool.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
It makes
And then what happened was they actually used it the other way around. They had recon units in Waste City that were trapped. They were upstairs in a certain building, and they were surrounded by 5,000 NVA. But they had radio communication with the ONTOS. So every time some NVA started coming near them, they'd say, can you put a spotter rifle in a window? And they'd say, which one? 2 houses over, this one. So we'd fire over there, and immediately 20 NVA would run out, because they thought the 106 was
It was coming after them, yeah.
So here, this is the enemy, knows enough that if you see a spotter round,
Yeah.
the 106 is not far away. So you had the 50 caliber that you could use, I guess, for sniper work or a warning system,
Yeah.
although usually you don't warn the enemy. But that was, and by the way, those recons stayed there for 5 or 6 days until they secured that part of the city, Waste City. You also had long range in this. You could do some 5,000 meter shots with this if you wanted to crank them up. They did it up in Quezon to shoot at a cliff or a gun that was shooting at them. They also, like today, if ever watch Ice Truckers, they have like an older version, 106. It's a 105, and they shoot in the mountains. They've missed a few times, but they cranked it up eventually and got it right. They made about a 4,500 meter shot to bring down an avalanche or snow.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And then
Yeah.
Colorado actually had the 106, according to a few sources, that they had avalanches that they're worried about in the mountains for the skiers, and they'd bring them down with the 106.
Yeah.
So the 106 could do some long-range shots if you cranked it up.
Right.
But by and far, if you're in Vietnam, most of your action was within 100, 90% of the time was within 100 meters
Yeah.
of what was going on.
And flat trajectory.
Right. And the other thing about this is related to Vietnam, is suppose you were driving along one day in Phu Bai and somebody shoots an RPG at you. Well, what happened was it missed the ONTOS, but 2 people were riding on the back. It hit the mechanic and severed his arm, and they had a Vietnamese Marine or a PF riding the other one, and it hit him in the stomach, sort of vaporized him. But at any rate, we were 2 ONTOS. We spun the ONTOS around. The mechanic was unfortunately back on the road somewhere. And what we did was we fired 6 shots, and we just started walking one every 50 meters into a tree line where that RPG came from. So we had probably 6 Hep-T in the tubes and 1 flechette. So we just fired 6 shots, all in the course of less than 30 seconds. No more RPGs. Had to go back and get the mechanic. I mean, his arm was severed. Took him to a battalion aid station. So the 6 shots, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
In other words, if you had an M48, you might be able to get 1 shot.
One minute, yeah.
But here, you're going across a tree line, and you didn't know where it came from, and you knew somewhere in the tree line.
Yeah.
And you just started on the left and worked to the right, and then we loaded up whomever the mechanic, and threw him on the front as it turned out to be, and drove him to a battalion aid station. And at the same time, nobody shot us again.
Mm-hmm.
And here we're driving on, I think it was like, I don't know, it was Route 5 or something. It was the road from Phu Bai to Highway 1. But that's pretty good capability that, you get into an ambush,
Yeah.
and you can turn around and fire 6 shots right away. And then we had the other ONTOS when we told him not to shoot, just one of us shot.
Right.
And because just in case we had to reload, he was going to cover us. So that's another capability of the ONTOS, that it could get off 6 shots.
Yeah.
And then that was an actual situation. The outside loading is actually, that's a detriment. Now we're talking about, a common problem. Oh, you got to get outside and load. Well, yes, you do. But the thing is most Marines aren't absolutely positively stupid. They're just not going to keep the vehicle in one spot where they're getting shot at. They're going to put it in reverse. The other ONTOS, the same with tanks, is going to cover them. It's sort of a leapfrog procedure. Go back. It doesn't matter if it's 100 meters or 300 meters. Just go back. There's no time limit on this. Get to a safe area. And your major thing you're always worrying about is somebody popping up with an RPG. Usually when you're back 100 meters or something with the doors open and throwing things in, you're usually not that worried about small arms fire. So they're always saying, you have to get outside and load. Well, that's very, very bad. Yeah, but the vehicle's got to reverse.
Yeah.
And the thing is it's not as if I did this like once over there. I did it like 50 times.
Yeah.
So even if you weren't, the smartest Marine on the block, after 10 times you're going to say, well, we always go back or you might find something that's like a dip in the road or something where you don't even have to go back 50 meters. You can
Right.
go back like 100 meters, go back 10 millimeters. So that's one of the common fallacies, and everybody says, oh, that's a dangerous vehicle. And it is and it isn't. So, and then
You had the doors for cover too.
Yeah.
And you opened the doors that gave you some
Oh, yeah.
protection.
Yeah.
They actually covered that too.
Yeah, okay.
We actually like this vehicle because that lightweight, right? And mine would do 55 miles an hour. It's a quick little vehicle
Yeah.
because we disconnected the gun.
Terrain-wise, could you?
Yeah,
you could handle.
it could go up places that I think they rated it like a 60 degrees or something like that. But it would be like this.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it definitely would do 45s. And the other thing is, in the early days, when the M48s got over here in 65 and 66, they would try to go through rice paddies and they would bog down.
Yeah.
Well, somebody came up with the idea to go get the ONTOS and have them
Tow
chain
them.
up timbers, bring
Oh.
timbers over. And then, nobody wanted to carry a big timber, right?
Yeah.
So I guess you could always find engineers' timbers. So the ONTOS would go back and forth to the rice paddy, carrying timbers for the M48. Now you'd say, well, how could that happen? Here again, it's more physics. Your M48 is probably a quick 45, 50 tons,
Yeah.
maybe even more with all the ammo.
62.
62? You probably got a track that's 2 feet wide. Your ONTOS is, 9 tons, and it's got a track, 18 inches wide. So when it wanted to push down on something, the M48 would just really sink down. The ONTOS didn't sink down like that. So it really could go through rice paddies and never had that problem. So, but small arms was not really a problem for an ONTOS. you know, you get dings in the guns, dings in the fenders, and we've got them out in Camp Pendleton now. They saw some mine that have, looks like got hit by a minigun. But at any rate, it's like, looks like a little ball peen hammer hit it or something. But small arms wouldn't affect it. They would say, well, what about a 50 caliber or 12.7 for the ME? It would really have to be a good shot. One of the other benefits I should have covered in design was it was shaped like a pyramid, and the Marines called it slope plate.
Right.
It wasn't straight up and it wasn't flat. It was like somewhere in the middle. But you know, almost also too, if you took the turret off on ONTOS, like the Romkey ones, it looked like a moving pyramid.
Mhm.
So it had this slope plate, and they actually used really good steel on the ONTOS. What they did is only about a half an inch thick, could be 5/8. It was layers of steel, almost like plywood. And we never would have thought that. We saw a couple down at Lejeune that are like 50 years old. They got hit by a 40 millimeter rocket fire or 20 millimeter rocket fire, and it peeled. So I just brought that to the attention of the Texas Marines, and they said, you know, it's a special type they were using.
Yeah.
So you had this steel. I don't think a 50 caliber was ever going to blow a hole on it, unless it had a really, really good shot. I'm sure there's such a thing as armor piercing, but you also had a little luck on your side. You had different things in the front of the vehicle. You had track jacks on one side, you had C-rats, you had jerry cans, you had mufflers, you had Pioneer tools, and they probably had the same thing on a turret, like the sponson box or whatever. Tons of junk up there. So it would take a really good 50 caliber to go through all that junk, and I think go through it. And you know, I'm sure there's always that lucky shot, but for the most part, small arms and 50 caliber machine gun fire was not going to be a threat. What was a threat, and it wasn't always 100% successful. If it detonated on a tube or detonated on some of the guns, the ONTOS actually got a second life. Or not the ONTOS, the crew got a second life. But B-40s were a big threat. You just did not want to let somebody hit you with an RPG or a B-40. And the RPG 3s or 5s, whatever they came out with in 68, 69, same thing. You just did not want to get hit by that.
Yeah. But you did tanks. Those are lethal.
And then some of the OCs and TCs were so good, they would be sky mounted down by Da Nang,
Right.
and they'd actually see an RPG coming at them or a B-40. They'd carry a stick and they'd tap the driver on this shoulder. That meant hard brake. They didn't communicate with like, do this now,
Yeah.
but they'd actually see it coming and they'd go like that, and the driver would pull back and hopefully dodge it to a certain degree. But it was almost as if they were watching that B-40 or RPG in slow motion.
Yeah.
So that's how good some of the TCs or OCs were. So that's I know
That's fascinating.
a little bit about the ONTOS.
Yeah.
This is ONTOS 101.
Yeah,
So.
that's great. Well, and I'm sure we're going to generate a ton of questions from this video. So bringing you guys back to talk about, there's going to be questions about what do you do, how do you elevate, how do you traverse, all that other good stuff. But more importantly, you know, could you get there faster, quicker, fire more, like you said, hit a tree line and just, you know, stagger it through rather than
They had
pop
a
shot?
competition once. You'll like this story. It was out in Pendleton. This has to be around 70, 71 before they took it out of the inventory. And I guess they had too many Vietnam veterans, and they had a pretty good company commander or battalion commander. So they packed up an M48. Here's the playing field. They backed up the M48 here. They backed up the ONTOS. That's the ONTOS. Here's the M48. And they said, both of you guys have a target. And it was, I don't know how they phrased it. They backed them up so they were like opposite facing. They had both, I guess they're both like facing in or something. And the ONTOS target was here, and the tank's target was here. They weren't both firing at the same target. So they said to him, when we tell you, go ahead and fire. So the ONTOS turret couldn't spin all the way around.
Mhm.
So what the ONTOS did was do a hard brake, turn the vehicle around, got on target with like the scope. He fired a 50 caliber spotter. As the spotter was going toward the target, he knew it was going to hit it. He let a Hep-T go.
Right.
He did this all within he spun the vehicle around, say, in 5 seconds. But by the time he got that other shot off, it was another 1 or 2 seconds. By the time he got the major going, it was like 4 more seconds. Meanwhile, the tank was spinning the turret to go back to he was on the target. So they were just showing, you know, how quick the they could do it. But the other thing, the high point of that was the TC or OC from the ONTOS was so Vietnam trained, he wasn't waiting around for that puff of smoke on the tracer or the spotter. He saw that it was going to hit the target when it was like 3/4 way down range, and then he let the 106 go, and he had confidence in his bore sighting.
Yeah. Wow.
And he hit it, and I used to always say to myself, you got 6 guns here. How can they hit the same area? Well, they didn't exactly hit the same area. They might have been off by like 20 feet or something like that, but it actually was a good spread pattern.
Good pattern.
Oh yeah, it's a great pattern. Well, first of all, when you launch something at somebody, they're going to start diddy bopping left, right, back, front, and you got 6 more coming at them or 5 more coming at them in some level of movement that they're adjusting. And like you said, if you're off by a couple of feet, you probably got to run them that way, or you got to run them that way. So.
Yeah, and also too, when you're talking about traversing and elevation, I think the traversing was a manual crank. You cranked it around. I think the elevation had a motor you could push in and it would go up. And at the same time, you had another lever that you could pump the breeches shut. So in a combat situation, most of the time, we didn't sit there and just close them, push them down, close them. You had to do a detent with it. You would slam the rounds in, or at least I did, put them in the half-cock position. Or if you had a good OC and you're running 2 people, you would just slam the rounds in and get it so it's like the lugs are interfacing on the breech. Could be like 1/4. And while you're running around to hop in the driver's seat, the ONTOS commander is reaching over and closing the top ones,
right.
And then the other ones he can't reach, the 4 on the top, the other 2 he'd pump shut. So the thing is a lot of it was manual, but the situation on this is that you can get a Bradley fighting vehicle. I mean, you can get, I'm sure the Marines had like 80-ton tanks.
Mm-hmm.
You can get things that the tank can't even go across the bridge.
Yeah.
This was built on the cheap, and somehow it coincided with a lightweight, high firepower, very maneuverable, and quick vehicle.
Yeah.
So before you know it, I don't know if everybody thought about all those attributes, but that's just the way it turned out. So if you want to keep putting more and more weight on something, it slows you down. You need more horsepower, and it affects the performance. So if you're looking for a stripped-out vehicle,
Yeah.
the ONTOS was pretty much it.
Fascinating.
Oh.
Okay, we'll do this again next reunion, and maybe even sooner.
Well, the other thing, part of what was very famous there is, and nobody seems to know it very well, is they went from a full-fledged battalion in Vietnam, because 5th ATs and 2nd ATs stayed with 45 vehicles, but in Vietnam, on December 15th, that was the official date, they went from a full-fledged battalion to a reinforced company. So 3rd ATs became 3rd ATs Alpha Company Reinforced, 1st ATs became Alpha Company Reinforced. But they started out, supposedly according to the TO, like 45 vehicles, but nobody knows how they did that. The lieutenant here, he knew about it because he was actually cleaning these. And then he said he had to take it to Qua Viet, then he had to bring it to the perfume, and then it had to go on a boat somewhere, right?
Yeah, we drove them all down to Dong Ha and loaded them on a small version of an LST and took them out to Qua Viet River, went down the coast, came in the Perfume River, offloaded at Hue City,
Hue City.
and then down to, what was the base down below Hue City? Just
Da Nang?
No, it was closer than Da Nang.
Not Phu Bai or...
No, it wasn't as far as Phu Bai. There was a small base, and there we cleaned them up. We spit polished them,
Wow.
washed them with diesel fuel. They look pretty.
How many
And then,
units?
Well, it was all of the 3rd Battalion, 3rd ATs
So it'd be
wound up there. So
100
3 companies.
Yeah, so I think you started out with 45.
45, yeah.
But they're
Okay.
reserving off 15, right?
Yeah, but we didn't have 45. We had, I think we were down to 4 vehicles in a platoon
Yeah.
at that time. So through attrition, we were down certain numbers, but they wound up with 15.
Yeah.
And the others, who knows where they went?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we know where they
We
went.
know.
What happened was the Marine Corps, actually got to give them credit for this, doesn't like to waste anything. So say he shipped back, he took 15 and it was 15 or 45 minus 15 or something. Say it was 30-something vehicles or 28 vehicles. They went back to Barstow. They went back to a depot. They came out with a program where they were rebuilding them. They were rebuilding the pack, they were rebuilding the transaxle, took them all apart, And they're very pretty vehicles, because I got one. And they're painted green on the outside and white on the inside. But I'd actually find the masking tape. So being like a 17 or 18-year-old kid, I knew auto body work. So I'd point out to the lieutenant or TC, I said, I did such a good job here. He left some masking tape, so I'd pull it off for him. He says, what do you think, this is a 67 Corvette? He says, I don't care. I said, yeah, but I wouldn't have done that. So at any rate, they just, humored me.
Yeah.
But at any rate, they went to Barstow, and they had something called restore and replace or something, refurbish and replace. It was called R&R. And I used to always tell the lieutenant we should keep one of the vehicles and keep their new ones. Oh, you can't do that. You've got to send it back. So what happened is, every 6 months, first ATs and third ATs, this is in 68, maybe mid 68, definitely 69, we get 5 new vehicles. So they were turning out about 10 per month on Barstow. So they'd have to go to some of these combat ones and restore them. So what happened was they went from wherever he shipped them in Vietnam, between Hue and Da Nang, they went to Barstow. But at the end of the war, or not end of the war, but by 1970, when they were pulling almost everything out, the ones in Barstow at some point went over to Ridgecrest, and we happened to have a Navy person that lived there or worked there up into the 80s, and they had 90 ONTOS on Ridgecrest, which is a high, it's called China Lakes, high security naval weapons station. And what they were doing was testing the Hellfire missile, and the best jet they had back then was the F-14. And they were using the Hellfire missile on any vehicle. It could be an Amtrak, could be a tank, could be a mule, could be a Jeep. Well, the problem was they'd actually set up the ONTOS with like remote controls. They had very good capabilities, and they'd be towing a few vehicles, or they'd be going down the road with 2 or 3, or I think it was 1 ONTOS, and they kept missing them. Their radar avionics package did not have the signature for ONTOS. It was too small. So they had 90.
Too small?
Too small. The ONTOS,
Wow.
They just kept missing. And yeah, I remember these missiles were like 50,000 a shot.
Yeah.
So they got tired of missing. So they had 90 there. I think they turned like 4 or 5 into a radar station, supposedly. But they still have like 70 some there. They destroyed probably like 5 or 6 of them.
Yeah.
And then recently the Marine Corps got 5 of them out of there after, in the last 2 years at Camp Pendleton, their museum. And they're out on the range there. But because of all the internet and everybody, pressuring the Navy to release them, they would say it's too dangerous to go out there on the range. There's unexploded ordnance. The unexploded ordnance is 45 caliber shells that all the Marines left in the ONTOS they didn't clean up, and some ended up on the ground. So they don't want to let anybody go out there because they're unexploded ordnance. But there's 75 ONTOS out there, and it's a mixed bag. It's first ATs, third ATs, fifth ATs. Some will say have a lieutenant's name on it because like Banning's Worry or something, and other ones will say 37 kills. So and then a lot of them still have the names painted on. The tubes are gone, but they painted the name somewhere. But it was just something. Oh, they painted on the turret. But it was just amazing. And my ONTOS, of all places, the Good, the Bad, the Ugly, is out there.
Where you found it?
Right, and it was a good combat vehicle to have, but they weren't really looking at the bumpers or the numbers. So when they pulled them out, they'd say, "Well, take this one, or this one." I've been out to Pendleton with the reunions a couple times, and I had actually identified which ONTOS they had. I said, "That's in Way City. That was a replacement for Way City." So the Marines needed some 106. There were some Texas Marines. They traded. They gave him the replacement vehicle, which was a better vehicle.
Right.
Sent it down to Texas. He's doing a marvelous restoration, but it was also a nice vehicle to start with.
Wow.
And the Way City vehicle, they restored it. It was like, no, it's really good. And then what happened was when I heard it, this is off track a little or off subject, but when I heard it running, I said, I can't believe I like that piece of junk. It was going like 15 miles an hour, making a lot of noise. And I said, I can't believe I liked it. But the thing was, I'm really being too critical at this point, especially when I'm 60 plus. When you're 17 or 18, it had a 361 Chrysler engine in it, even though the manuals say 318 at Del Mar.
Yeah.
It was a 361 truck engine in there, industrial engine. The car engine at Dodge or Plymouth or Chrysler would have been a 383. When you started this thing up, it sounded like a Corvette from the 60s.
Oh, okay.
It sounded great.
Yeah.
So what happened is if you were a 17, 18, or 19-year-old stuffy, they were not giving you a helicopter to fly.
Yeah.
You were not flying an F-4. So your choice of like a hot rod in the Marine Corps would have been an M48, maybe a truck. PC was too slow, or the ONTOS.
Yeah.
But the ONTOS had a nice roar to it.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be waiting a long time for an M37 to have a roar to it.
Yeah.
So if you were a 17, 18, 19-year-old kid, and you got over there, you said, wow, I
Yeah,
like this
I like
vehicle.
this.
Because when you started up, I mean, you sit there for a few minutes, it had a truck muffler on it right outside there,
Yeah.
so it had a mellow tone. But you could tell right away that was a V8 engine.
Yeah.
So that's another like side note. But the thing, I actually wrote that back in 2000, that if you were a kid, this is about or a Marine or a 17, 18, 19-year-old, this was your Corvette.
Yeah.
So somebody copied that.
Yeah. Well, that's great. What we'll do is we'll wrap it up, but we
Okay.
really want to get ONTOS more exposure with the
Okay.
group here, because I've got tons of pictures
I got
from
tons of
guys who
pictures.
had them, and, oh yeah, ONTOS were with us, well, who did what? Well, we don't know, they were there and they fired at this, but we never got the stories like you guys are telling now. And that's really critical, because it was really, it was an exciting weapon to have. And like you said, I think everybody that was associated with him thought it was really like the hot rod of, you know, you're
Well, so
young
too,
and-
you got to remember, after I left Tank Battalion or ONTOS, because they pulled them out for 6, 7 months, I went to First Tanks, and I was talking to one of the guys, and they called it like a reactionary. I was like way out on the northwest corner of Vietnam. It was an OP, and they gave me any weapon I wanted. I took 106s, by the way, and Starlight. At any rate, when we were out there, I was on the same hills, a Hill 70, with the ONTOS in the beginning of my tour, like it was in January of '69, and they had NVA there. I was coming up to the head of '69, and we fired away one night like 20, 30 rounds. And I remember it real well, because the next day I had to go back to Tank Battalion, and they actually had these 55-gallon drums cut in half, and they had that, I don't know if it was mineral syrups or solvents, so it was some sort of solvent, right? We were lucky, first tanks had more than third tanks. So they had the solvents, but it would burn your hand. So you're scrubbing away on those guns. So we fired like 30 rounds, but they were carbonized. It was almost if you had a frying pan that you just burned too much.
Mhm.
You would just scrub away. And you took the bluing off the guns, of course, right? But for firing, like, I don't know, just throw a number out there, 2 hours, you're doing at least 8 hours worth of cleaning. And that's if the crew helped you.
Yeah.
I couldn't find my TC. He disappeared. But it was something like exactly a year later, the place got overrun. And I said, I wish I had those ONTOS. And for a while, they still were in country, because they didn't
Yeah.
leave till March of '70. So they were parked in Tank Battalion, waiting to go back. But if you're an infantry person, you really wanted an ONTOS there.
Yeah.
You know, in other words, if you're there with your M16, and I guess whatever you humped in,
Yeah.
you actually wanted the firepower there. And also, too, what happened is, it's sort of like the buddy system, you know, and instead of being like, say you were, I don't know, 9th Marines, you'd say, well, I'm 9th Marines, plus I got a forward observer with me, plus I got a scout with the dog, plus
Right.
I got, you know, the tanks, plus I got ONTOS. You actually wanted more people to be with you.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Yeah, so what it is, you know, if you look at it from the infantry point, you know, it was, they wanted it. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, a lot of things entered the fray, and part of it was with Vietnam was Nixon was making the troop withdrawals.
Yeah.
So I think what he did is he gives his marching orders to the generals, and they say, okay, we'll pull something out. You know, they're not necessarily going to pull out like the Marine infantry units,
Yeah.
because they know they need them. They'd say, well, let me see, what can we pull out here?
Yeah.
So what happened is, here they pulled out a unit or something that was supporting the infantry, but if they asked the infantry guy what to pull out, you know, he'd have told them, I don't know, why don't you pull out FLC?
Yeah.
So.
Or all those guys in the bunker that aren't out here having to deal with this stuff. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Roger.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick. And we definitely want to get more of this information about the ONTOS, because it's kind of a mystery to a lot of us who, you know, had them over here and all of a sudden they went somewhere else. And like many of us with heavy sections and light sections, you know, you probably, like you said, you operated with 2 or 3. You didn't know where the other 2 were and what they were doing and so forth. So if we can get some more of the ONTOS input in the stories, it'd be great.
Yeah, the other thing too is we did that Excel schedule. I wish you guys had done it. You get the bumper off the tanks, and a lot of them, the command chronicles, definitely for first tanks, they list all the vehicles.
Oh, is that right?
So what happens is, it's it's a small world in the Marine Corps. You might have had, 45 in one battalion, 45 in another, but maybe the total production that the Marine Corps had was, during that era, might have been under 500 tanks.
Yeah.
So if you start doing an Excel schedule, and you just pick it up off the picture, because he has one there,
Yeah.
you just keep putting it in there line by line. Our schedule's probably up to 170, 180 out of the 290,
Really?
299, yeah.
Wow.
Plus, what's nice about it is, if you get somebody that's a statistics wizard or a math person, or somebody that's pretty heads up, they're going to see a pattern. They see some low numbers at 680, that must be where the production started. Then they see a high number around 970, and say, well, gee, we have like 280 vehicles right here. So they say, wow, look at this. So all of a sudden, you've got like the beginning point and the end point.
Mhm.
So what happens is, if it was 299, you're only like 10 off from your end points.
Yeah.
You're saying, wow, we're pretty close there.
Yeah.
Because remember, they don't write a book in the Marine Corps and say, this is what you have to remember. When it comes to the supply system,
Yeah.
and then that thing with the depot, if you said depot to me 30 years ago, I would have said, what is it, a hot dog?
Yeah.
It's just something like, the only way depot makes sense to me is like Home Depot.
Yeah.
It's like a warehouse.
Yeah.
But it's just something that the Marine Corps doesn't say, oh yeah, we got this marvelous supply system where there's procurement in the Defense Department, this, and then by the way, we send it to like Barstow, Albany, and then it's like an octopus that goes out to all the different places. You never get a class like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So, and there's an awful lot that's important in those depots.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
I always said to myself, if I go back to Vietnam again or something like that, I want to be a supply officer.
Well, they got all the gear, that's for sure. Thank you, guys.